That night in the deep, tangled jungles of Vietnam, the air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth clinging to our fatigues. The sounds of the jungle never stopped, chirping insects, distant hoots of night birds, and the occasional rustle of something unseen in the undergrowth. But what we heard that night, it wasn't normal. It wasn't the jungle's usual music. It was something else entirely. A deep, guttural howl, followed by the unmistakable sound of branches snapping under heavy weight. I remember the way my pulse quickened, how the guys around me stiffened, gripping their rifles just a little tighter. We weren't new to the jungle. We had spent months trudging through its depths, moving through the dense foliage, always on edge. But this was different. There was something in the trees, something watching us. And it wasn't human. We had heard the rumors before, passed between hushed conversations at base camp. The locals had their stories, tales of a creature, half man, half beast, that lurked in the shadows of the mountains. Some called it the Nguoi Rung, the Rock Ape. Most of us laughed it off at first. War does things to a man's mind, and the jungle, with its never-ending darkness, could make even the bravest soldier see things that weren't there. But the ones who had seen it firsthand, they never laughed. One of the guys in our unit, Corporal Harris, swore he had seen one once during a patrol. He never spoke about it willingly, but when pressed, his voice would drop to a whisper, and his eyes would dart around as if checking to make sure nothing was listening. "Big," he'd say. "Too damn big. It ain't no monkey. Ain't no man either. We should have listened to him." That night, as we sat in the thick of the jungle, keeping our voices low, something moved in the trees just beyond our line of sight. At first it was just a feeling, an itch at the back of the neck, that primal sense that something was near. Then the noises started again, louder this time. Branches snapping, leaves rustling. A low growl, deep enough to rattle your bones. Private Mason, the youngest in our unit, shifted uneasily. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, barely above a whisper. No one answered. We were all listening now, our breaths shallow, ears straining against the sounds of the jungle. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move, something massive. A shadow, shifting against the dense foliage. There 1 second, gone the next. And then came the worst part, the silence. The jungle, usually alive with noise, had gone completely still. No insects, no birds, nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing, heavy and uneven. Twigs snapped. This time it was close. Too close. That was when we saw it. It happened so fast that for a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The shadows in the trees seemed to shift, and then, in the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy, something enormous moved. It wasn't just the size that made my blood run cold. It was the way it moved, low and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. Private Mason sucked in a sharp breath beside me, gripping his rifle so tight his knuckles turned white. "Jesus," he whispered. I could feel the weight of every eye in our squad locked onto the same spot, yet none of us dared to move. The jungle was thick, but in that moment, the leaves parted just enough for us to see it. Broad shoulders covered in coarse, matted hair, long arms that hung almost to the ground, and eyes. Those eyes. They didn't glow like an animal's in the dark, but they reflected something, something unnatural. It was watching us. Time stretched impossibly thin. No one moved, no one breathed. The only sound was the distant thudding of my heartbeat in my ears. My mind screamed at me to do something. Run, shoot, shout, but my body refused to listen. Then, as if the moment had never happened, the thing turned, disappearing back into the brush without a sound. The jungle swallowed it whole. For a second no one spoke. It was Mason who finally broke the silence. "Tell me someone else saw that," he said, his voice shaking. "Yeah," Corporal Harris muttered, still staring at the trees. "We saw it." No one knew what to say after that. We sat there, gripping our weapons like they might actually do something against whatever that was. Finally, Sergeant Willis spoke, his voice low and firm. "We move. Now." We didn't argue. Staying there felt like sitting ducks waiting for whatever was out there to come back. We packed up fast, barely bothering to check our perimeter. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a bird had us flinching. The jungle, already unforgiving, felt like it had closed in around us, watching. As we pushed forward, I kept thinking about the stories we'd heard. The Rock Apes, half myth, half nightmare. Some said they were just overgrown monkeys, misidentified under the stress of war. Others swore they were something else, something ancient. The locals wouldn't even talk about them, not really. They'd shake their heads, mutter a prayer under their breath, and change the subject. It wasn't until we reached a small clearing that Sergeant Willis finally called for a break. None of us wanted to stop, but we were exhausted, nerves frayed from whatever we had just witnessed. Harris crouched beside me, wiping sweat from his face. "You remember that story Jenkins told back at camp?" he said, voice low. He nodded. Course I remembered. Jenkins had been with another unit, stationed further up in the mountains. One night they heard movement outside their camp, big heavy footsteps circling them just beyond the firelight. At first they thought it was Viet Cong scouts, but then the rocks started flying. Huge stones hurled from the darkness with terrifying force, smashing against trees and tents. By the time morning came, half their camp was torn apart, but there were no footprints. Just drag marks leading into the jungle, as if something had been watching them all night. Jenkins hadn't slept right since. "You think this is the same thing?" Harris asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. We sat in a tight circle, rifles at the ready, watching the tree lean like whatever was out there might step through at any moment. But it never did. At dawn, the jungle came alive again, as if nothing had happened. Birds sang, insects buzzed, and the oppressive silence of the night before was gone. But the tension in our group didn't fade. No one spoke about what we had seen, but it hung over us, thick and heavy. As we packed up to move, Mason hesitated. "You think it'll follow us?" he asked. Harris didn't answer right away. Then finally he said, "I think it already is." We kept moving, but the feeling of being watched never left us. The jungle was thick, the heat pressing down on us like a weight. Every so often, I'd catch someone glancing over their shoulder, scanning the trees, searching for movement. But whatever had been out there the night before, if it was still following us, it was staying just out of sight. Sergeant Willis didn't talk about it. He just kept us focused on the mission, leading us deeper into the jungle, where the trees grew taller, the air got heavier, and the silence between us stretched longer. But there was something different about our pace. It was faster, sharper. Like we all knew we had to get out of this place before nightfall. It was sometime around midday when we found the tracks. Private Mason was the first to notice them. Deep impressions in the soft earth, too big to belong to a human, too defined to be a trick of the light. We all gathered around, staring down at them, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "They look fresh," Harris muttered. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge of one of the prints. It was at least twice the size of my boot, with deep grooves where whatever had made it had pushed off into the dirt. There was a weight behind it, a force that sent a shiver up my spine. Sergeant Willis knelt beside me, his face unreadable. "How many do you see?" I swallowed. "More than one." That was the part that made my stomach twist. The night before we had seen one. Just one. But these tracks, there were at least 3 sets, maybe more. And they were heading in the same direction we were. No one spoke. No one needed to. We all understood the same thing. We weren't just being watched. We were being followed. Mason exhaled sharply. "Maybe we should head back." Willis shook his head. "We have orders." He didn't say it, but we all heard the unsaid part loud and clear. Orders or not, we weren't about to turn back through whatever was behind us. Forward was the only option. We moved with more urgency after that, keeping our formation tight, staying alert. Every shadow felt longer, every sound sharper. And then, as the sun started dipping behind the trees, we came across something worse than the tracks. A clearing, eerily quiet, with something in the center. At first, I thought it was just debris, fallen branches, maybe some old supply crates left behind by another unit. But as we got closer, my stomach clenched. Bones scattered across the ground, picked clean, some still tangled in scraps of rotted fabric. They weren't animal bones. No one said a word. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Blood. Old but still there. Harris took a slow step forward, his boot crunching against a broken ribcage. This wasn't just left here, he murmured. This was put here. He was right. The way the bones were arranged, piled together in the center, almost in a circle, it wasn't natural. It wasn't the aftermath of a firefight, either. This was deliberate. Mason's breathing was shaky. What the hell does that mean? I didn't have an answer, but deep down, I felt something cold settle in my gut. "We're moving," Willis said, his voice tight. "Now." We didn't argue. As we pushed forward, the jungle felt heavier, like the trees were pressing in on us. The light was fading fast, the sky above turning that deep shade of blue that meant night was coming, and with it, whatever had left those tracks. And then, just as the last sliver of sunlight disappeared, we heard it. A low, guttural sound not far behind us. Deep enough to rattle my chest, to send ice straight through my veins. It wasn't human. And it wasn't alone. We picked up the pace, but the sounds followed. Twigs snapping, branches shaking. Heavy footsteps getting closer. And then, from somewhere in the trees, movement. A shadow, larger than any man, shifting through the darkness. Then another. And another. We weren't just being followed anymore. We were being hunted. The jungle felt like it was closing in around us, every shadow stretching longer, every rustling leaf making my pulse hammer harder. We weren't just hearing them anymore, we could feel them. The weight of unseen eyes pressing against us from all sides. The rock apes, the things we had dismissed as campfire stories, weren't just real. They were here. Willis motioned for us to keep moving. His hand a quick, sharp signal in the dim light. We picked up the pace, boots crunching against the damp earth, breath coming fast and shallow. The sounds behind us weren't fading. They were getting closer. Then came the first stone. It crashed through the canopy, slamming into the ground just a few feet from Mason with a sickening thud. Not a stray rock tumbling from a hillside. This had been thrown. Deliberate. Intentional. Mason choked out a curse, stumbling back, eyes wide. "They're toying with us," he whispered. His voice almost lost beneath the thick weight of the jungle. Another rock came, this one striking a tree just to my right, sending splinters of bark flying. Then another. They weren't just trying to scare us. They were closing in. "Keep moving," Willis hissed, pushing forward. But I could hear it in his voice now. The same thing we were all feeling. Panic. The jungle path narrowed, forcing us closer together. Every step felt like we were walking deeper into something we didn't understand. The trees pressed in, their thick vines draped like grasping fingers. And all around us the movement never stopped. Shifting shadows. Heavy footsteps. Deep, guttural grunts, rising and falling like they were talking to each other. Coordinating. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure just beyond the tree line. Massive, covered in thick, matted hair. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, its arms long and powerful. But it wasn't just the size that froze me in place. It was the way it moved. Purposeful. Controlled. Intelligent. Knew we were watching. And it didn't care. Then it stepped back, melting into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. Harris had seen it too. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "That thing," he muttered under his breath. "It's waiting." Waiting for what? We didn't have to wonder for long. A sudden deafening crash echoed through the trees as something huge barreled through the undergrowth to our right. It wasn't just movement anymore, it was charging. "Go! Go now!" Willis shouted, and we broke into a sprint. Branches whipped against my face, my boots sinking into the damp soil as I ran. The jungle was a blur, shadows twisting, shifting, figures moving just out of sight. The grunts turned into roars now, deep and primal, vibrating through the air like thunder. And then, from ahead of us, a sound that made my stomach drop. A howl, long, guttural, and answered by another. They weren't just behind us anymore. They were in front of us too. We skidded to a stop, our boots sinking into the thick jungle mud. The howls ahead of us cut through the air like a warning, deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the truth. We weren't just being hunted. We had been herded. Willis held up a fist, signaling for us to hold. His breathing was ragged, his face slick with sweat, but his hands didn't shake. "Fan out," he whispered. "Weapons ready." None of us needed to be told twice. We dropped into a tight defensive circle, rifles aimed into the darkness. The jungle was alive with movement now. Low, rumbling growls echoed from all around us, shifting from one side to the other, like they were testing us, seeing how we would react. Then, just beyond the tree line, something moved. Not one of them. Something else. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A shape smaller than the others but moving fast. Then another. They weren't coming toward us. They were retreating. A second later, an explosion of movement tore through the trees to our left, and for the first time the Rock Apes, the creatures we had been running from, let out sharp, guttural cries that sounded almost like surprise. Eyes left. Harris barked, spinning toward the disturbance. But before we could react, the jungle erupted into chaos. A figure burst through the undergrowth, moving too fast for me to process. A blur of dark clothing, a rifle slung across their back. Human. "What the?" Mason started, but the man didn't stop. He shot past us without so much as a glance, disappearing into the trees ahead. Another shape followed, then another, 5, maybe 6 of them, moving like they knew this jungle better than we ever could. Their faces were painted, their bodies lean and silent as ghosts. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone. The Rock Apes were no longer focused on us. The howls turned into sharp, agitated grunts, their heavy footfalls shifting direction, following the new arrivals. The air crackled with tension. Whatever was happening, it wasn't part of their plan. "Who the hell were they?" Mason whispered, his knuckles white around his rifle. Harris exhaled slowly. "Montagnards," he muttered. "Tribesmen." The realization hit me like a brick. We had heard the stories. The Montagnard people lived deep in the jungle, avoiding both sides of the war, fighting only when necessary. But there were rumors, whispers from other squads who had passed through these mountains, stories that the Montagnards knew about the Rock Apes, that they had been fighting them for generations. If they were here now, it wasn't by coincidence. The distant sound of gunfire snapped me back to reality. Short bursts, controlled, followed by more guttural howls of rage. The Montagnards weren't running anymore. They were fighting. "Do we help them?" Mason asked, shifting on his feet. Willis didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the darkness ahead, weighing the same thought that was burning in all of our minds. If these people, locals, warriors who had survived in this jungle longer than any of us, were fighting the Rock Apes, then they knew something we didn't. And maybe, just maybe, they knew how to kill them. Willis adjusted his grip on his rifle. "We move," he said. "Fast." We didn't hesitate. As we pushed forward, the jungle around us pulsed with unseen violence. Shadows clashed against shadows, the sound of flesh meeting flesh, of guttural cries and deep, bone-rattling snarls. The Montagnards weren't just fighting to survive. They were hunting. And if they were hunting, it meant the Rock Apes weren't invincible. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through me. For the first time, the fear that had been choking me since that first sighting loosened just enough for something else to slip through. Oh. But then, as we neared the clearing ahead, that hope turned to something else. Something colder. Because as the trees thinned, we saw it. A figure lay sprawled in the dirt, unmoving. One of the Montagnards. His chest was torn open, his throat a mess of ragged flesh. The ground around him was soaked dark. Beyond him, just at the edge of the clearing, stood one of the rock apes. It was different from the others. Bigger. Its fur was darker, streaked with mud and something else. Blood. It didn't move. It just stood there, breathing heavy, staring at us. Not with fear. Not with anger. With understanding. And then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it reached down and picked up something half buried in the dirt. A weapon. Rifle. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a creature. It was learning. None of us moved. The jungle around us seemed to shrink, the air so thick it felt like we were drowning in it. The rock ape stood there, gripping the rifle in its massive hands, its fingers curling around the weapon with an eerie familiarity. It didn't just hold it, it understood it. That was the part that sent ice through my veins. For a long, terrible second no one spoke. No one breathed. The creature's dark eyes flicked between us, as if calculating something, as if weighing options. Then, without warning, it let out a deep, guttural growl and threw the rifle to the ground. The message was clear. It didn't need our weapons. It was already the apex predator here. A blur of movement in the trees snapped us back into the moment. The montagnards hadn't stopped fighting. The howls and gunfire had moved deeper into the jungle, but we weren't out of danger. Not yet. Willis made the call without hesitation. Move. Now. We broke into a run, skirting the clearing, putting as much distance between us and the creature as possible. Didn't chase us. It didn't have to. The message had been delivered. We pushed forward, following the sounds of the montagnards, our boots pounding against the earth, our breath ragged. The jungle was still alive with battle, the deep roars of the rock apes mixing with sharp, controlled bursts of gunfire. These men, these warriors, weren't running. They were winning. And then we saw why. Ahead, in another clearing, a group of montagnards stood over a fallen rock ape. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, its thick body slumped against the roots of a tree, dark blood pooling beneath it. They had done the impossible. They had killed one. But it wasn't just the body that stopped me cold. It was what was behind it. A massive stone structure, half buried in the jungle, covered in moss and vines. Temple. The montagnards hadn't just been fighting these creatures. They had been guarding something. Willis stepped forward cautiously, rifle raised. But one of the montagnard men turned and held up a hand. A warning. He said something in a low, firm voice. His eyes locked on the temple. Harris, still catching his breath, tried to translate. He says, "This is their territory. Their real home." He paused. "And we're standing at the edge of something we're not supposed to see." The words sent a cold shiver through me. Before I could ask what that meant, another sound cut through the jungle. A deep, mournful howl, different from the others. Not of rage, of grief. The creatures had realized one of their own had fallen, and now they were coming. The montagnards moved quickly, gathering what they could, pulling back into the jungle with a kind of urgency that told us all we needed to know. They weren't staying for round 2. Neither were we. We ran. The howls followed closer and closer, but we didn't stop. We pushed through the trees, through the mud, until the sound started to fade, until the jungle opened up, until we saw something that nearly made me collapse in relief. The river. A wide stretch of water, slow-moving but deep. Our extraction point. Willis grabbed the radio, his voice sharp. "This is Alpha Team. Immediate extraction. Coordinates marked." The response crackled through almost instantly. "Copy, Alpha. Bird inbound." The roar of a helicopter in the distance sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through me. We were going to make it. But as I turned back to the jungle, as I looked at the dark tree line one last time, I felt it again. The weight of those unseen eyes. They weren't following us anymore. Because they didn't need to. They had let us go. Not because they were afraid. Not because they had lost. Because we had seen something we weren't meant to see. And they knew no matter how far we ran, no matter where we went, we would never forget. The rhythmic thumping of the helicopter blades grew louder, cutting through the jungle's oppressive silence. We reached the riverbank, our boots sinking into the mud, and I barely had time to register the exhaustion creeping through my body. My hands were still shaking, my mind racing. Every shadow, every twisted branch, felt like a shape waiting to move, like something watching. The helicopter appeared through the haze, the wind from its blades whipping against the trees as it hovered just above the ground. Willis was the first to signal, waving his arm as the crew inside prepared for extraction. One by one we scrambled up, gripping onto whatever we could, our hearts still pounding with the weight of what we had seen. As we lifted off, the jungle stretched out below us, an endless sea of green swallowing the world. I found myself staring back at the dark tree line, half expecting to see movement, to catch a glimpse of one of them standing at the edge, watching us go. But there was nothing, just the jungle, still and unmoving. Mason let out a shaky breath beside me. "We made it," he muttered, almost like he didn't believe it. No one answered. We had made it out, yes. But something told me none of us would ever really leave that place behind. Harris was hunched forward, staring at his hands. His knuckles were scraped raw, dirt caked under his nails. "We weren't supposed to see that temple," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "They weren't just hunting. They were protecting something." The thought sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to believe the Rock Apes were just territorial animals, acting on instinct, reacting to our presence. But that moment in the clearing, the way that creature had looked at us, the way it had discarded the rifle, as if it was mocking us, proved something else. They weren't just animals. Willis, sitting across from us, didn't say a word. He just stared out of the open door, his expression unreadable. He had been in combat zones before, had seen things most men wouldn't believe. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was something older, something bigger than all of us. As we flew over the dense jungle, leaving it behind, the radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was calm, routine. "Alpha Team, confirm mission status." Willis hesitated, his fingers tightening around the radio. Then, in a steady voice, he responded, "Mission compromised. No further action required." No further action. That was code. That meant we weren't reporting what had happened. Not officially. Because even if we did, who would believe us? The flight back to base was silent. No one spoke, no one joked or laughed. We were too lost in our own heads, replaying every moment, every sound, every impossible sight. By the time we landed, the world outside felt different. Brighter, louder, normal. But we weren't the same. Debriefing was brief. Willis handled most of it, keeping the details vague. Hostile terrain, unexpected engagement, casualties among local forces. No mention of what we had actually seen. No mention of the Montagnards who had fought alongside us. No mention of the creatures in the jungle. It was better that way. We went our separate ways after that. Some of the guys transferred to different units. Others took early discharges. We never talked about it. Not once. It wasn't the kind of thing you put into words. But late at night when I closed my eyes, I could still hear them. The heavy footfalls. The low, guttural grunts. The sound of rocks crashing through the trees. And worse than that, I could still see the way that one had looked at us. Like it understood. Years passed, but the memory never faded. I tried to make sense of it, to find some kind of explanation. I dug through old reports, old records. Found scraps of information buried in military archives. Whispers of strange encounters, strange disappearances, dating back decades. The Rock Apes weren't just stories. They weren't just rumors passed around by soldiers at night. They were real. And they had been there long before us. I don't know if they're still out there, if they still roam those mountains, hidden from the world. But I do know one thing. They let us leave that day. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to.